We're going to get started as soon as we have a few more executive committee members that show up. I know they're coming. And if you are a delegate or an alternate from your NPU and have a parking ticket, please give them to Ms. LaRue so that she can validate the parking for you.
Right behind me, one quarters. Put on a suit and tie now. He's wearing a t-shirt. I've never seen him without a suit and tie. So I think I missed a communication, Debbie, that maybe I wasn't. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you need a minute to get organized? We can pass them out. Let me start over. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the APAB meeting for September. I'm Debbie Skipczynski, your chair and chair of NPUF. I'd like to introduce those folks that are at the front podium with us, who are on our executive committee. At my far right is Eunice Glover, who is our second vice president, Eric Toomer, our first vice president, and to my far left is Jim Martin, who is parliamentarian as well as chair of zoning and land, the CDHS committees. Also in the room is corresponding secretary Richard Rao from NPUB, and Terry Ross, who is chair of Committee of Council, who seems to have disappeared, but he should be back shortly. Did I forget anyone? I don't think so. APAB's an official city board and a representative body of the 25 NPUs, with each MPU having a single vote. Each MPU must formally notify the Department of City Planning and APAB of their official delegate and alternate, and only these delegates or alternates can vote. If you've been selected or elected a delegate from your NPU and your name's not on the sign-in sheet, please contact your NPU chair. They need to officially send an email to Ms. LaRue, who's at the very far end. Sorry, I should have introduced you. Or to Daniel Vasquez, who ably assists the NPUs. So that we can keep to our 2-hour time frame, I'll be recognizing only delegates and alternates to speak throughout the meeting, so that there's an opportunity for everyone to speak. I'm going to ask that you only speak once on a topic, unless you are asked for clarification or a question on previous remarks. So please, no hogging of the microphone. Time's been set aside for others to speak during public comment at the end of the agenda, and keep all questions germane to the topic being addressed and respectful of those in the room. I'll be watching the time and may need to cut off discussion maybe prematurely, but we want to get through our entire agenda, including public comment at the end of the meeting. If you wish to speak, please come to the podium and identify yourself by name and NPU. That's for the record. And if you're a delegate or an alternate, so please let us know that. And comments made from the floor will not be picked up by Channel 26, so it's real important that you come to the podium. And then as a reminder, no food or beverages are allowed in the committee room. I want to take this time to thank the Department of City Planning and Leah and Daniel for providing breakfast for us this morning. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also, if you are a delegate or alternate from your NPU, please give your parking ticket to Ms. Leah, who will validate that for you. The guidelines for parking reimbursement are on the front table. If you've got any questions, please let me know. We're going to dispense with the roll call at this point because we're a couple shy of a quorum. We usually get that a little bit later in the morning. So I want to move directly to presentations. First on the agenda is Karen Carter, who is Director of Office of Grant Management, and she's going to give us an overview of their strategic planning process. Karen, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you. Again, I'm Karen Carter, Director of the Office of Grants Management here at the city. And today we just wanted to give you a quick update on our strategic planning process and the components that go into it, inviting input from our community into the planning. I will give you a quick overview and then turn it over to Jeremy Gray, who is from Mosaic Community Planning, the consulting firm that the city has hired to help us in developing this. So the purpose, again, is just kind of to share the process with you and then invite input from the community on the priorities. And those priorities that the community have will help inform us on how to develop our plan. This plan is a requirement of HUD, and we're talking about the consolidated plan for our U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development entitlement funds that the city is awarded every year. Every 5 years, HUD requires that the city provide a 5-year strategic plan, which they call the consolidated plan. And that's like the 5-year long-range look for the framework from the community to identify housing and community development priorities and kind of align the priorities of the community with the proposal that we present to HUD to obtain the funding. Every year during that 5-year period and every 5-year period, the city also submits an annual action plan. The annual action plan drills down just a little more specifically into the specific actions and activities that support the 5-year strategic plan, and all of the focus areas that we have identified in the 5 years are kind of drilled down annually, because annually HUD awards the city with grant funding. So we submit both the consolidated plan and the annual action plan for 2020, probably in the beginning of the year, the annual year 2020, for the 5-year plan. And then every year, our report card back to HUD that tells what our outcomes, our progress on the work that we've done is called the Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. And that's a report card that really deals with our outcomes and our deliverables as we've identified in not only our consolidated plan, but the annual plan for that year. So it's the report card to HUD. So just to give you a roundup of this, all of these things must be submitted to HUD from the City of Atlanta. We are the grantee of these, and all these functions heavily inform the work that we're doing in the service for our service providers and the community that's driving this policy. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy so that he can kind of share with you the steps that we're going to go through to develop the plan and request some support from you.
Good morning. I'm Jeremy Gray with Mosaic Community Planning. To follow or continue kind of the presentation that Karen began, the consolidated plan and the annual action plan concern these 4 different grant programs that the city receives kind of in the middle of that slide. So the Community Development Block Grant, or the CDBG, the Home Grant, which is an affordable housing grant, ESG is a homelessness services grant, and HOPWA, which is housing opportunities for people living with AIDS. Briefly, just to touch on those different grant programs and what types of things are eligible for funding under those, the CDBG is the broadest and the most flexible of those grant programs. Lots of different types of activities can be funded. For example, small business loans, code enforcement, sidewalks, curb and gutter improvements, economic development type things, public services, so that might be youth services, senior services, things of that sort. The home grant is the affordable housing grant. Typically, home projects might be tenant-based rental assistance, a voucher sort of program, almost resembling Section 8, but this is a different funding source for it, where a tenant can take a voucher, choose housing of his or her choice. The voucher makes up the difference in rent. First-time homebuyer assistance, closing cost assistance, actual development gap financing for larger affordable housing developments. Oftentimes those might be tax credit deals that the city loans home funds into to make the financing work. The Emergency Solutions Grant funds street outreach toward the homeless population, trying to bring them into the network of providers and services. Creating emergency shelters, rehabbing, improving emergency shelters, operating those shelters, might be utility expenses, staff expenses associated with that. Services to shelter residents like job training, job skills. Rapid rehousing and homeless prevention would be things like rent payments, security deposits, utility payments to keep someone who's on the verge of homelessness in their home so that that doesn't occur, or someone who has become homeless to get them back into their housing first and then work on whatever issues there might have been that led to homelessness. I don't have a slide on it, but the HOPWA grant program is really the largest of all of them, but Atlanta receives a grant that serves the entire 29-county metro region under the HOPWA program. The housing opportunities for people with AIDS, those funds typically go for things like permanent supportive housing, so permanent housing with support services that serve that population, short-term rent and utility payments to help people with those housing type expenses. There's a second study that we're working on for the city called an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And so every year when the city signs and sends to HUD its annual action plan describing what it's planning to do with the funds it receives under those grant programs, the city also signs a certification saying that it will affirmatively further fair housing choice. And this is the definition of what that is. And so it entails combating discrimination and kind of the overt forms that we all know and recognize, but going beyond that too, taking actions to overcome segregation, to foster inclusive communities, and to increase and improve access to opportunity for residents. In preparing that study, there are 4 key fair housing issues that we look at: integration and segregation, areas of poverty, particularly where poverty intersects with areas, communities that have large shares of people of color and racial and ethnic minorities. Access to opportunity, so kind of mapping where certain opportunity features lie within the city, and then by virtue of that, who has access to that opportunity based on where they live. And then housing need, particularly disproportionate housing needs, things like cost burden, substandard housing, overcrowding, and how those needs might be different based on race and ethnicity. So in terms of our process, now and through October, we're gathering community input, and that's really what brings us here before you today. As representatives for communities all over the city, we hope that you can help us spread the word about opportunities to engage in the process. October and November, we're kind of compiling all the information that we've received from the public, also compiling that with the data from HUD and putting our draft report together. That'll go out in the early next year for public review and comment. We would invite people to take a look at it at that point, let us know what's in there, what you think is right and what things you think we might have missed. That's the opportunity for that in January. And then in February, those reports are final and they go to HUD. There's a website for our project. It's atlantaconplan.com that has really everything that you might want to know about the project. So it has fact sheets on those grant programs if you wanted to learn more about those. I mentioned some mapping. There's interactive maps that HUD provides grantees. You can access those through our site. We would encourage anybody who's interested in that to look at that. We have a public meeting coming up in October 9th. It'll be here at City Hall in the Old Council Chambers. We also have a survey, and that's really probably the easiest way for people to engage in our process. You can access that survey from our website, atlantaconplan.com. Also, feel free to email or call us with that information there on the screen if there's other input that you wanted to share. And okay.
You ready for questions?
I believe so.
No.
Ready for questions? Does anyone have any questions or wants to make any? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Yeah, you.
Questions are real easy. First, on the, I think it was CBGD, it states low income, but it also states small business loan, or those were the bullet items. Is there a difference between the two in terms of qualification and amounts, respectively? And then the second question, will you provide this presentation to the NPU chairs?
Certainly, we'd be happy to do that. I think we can provide that through you. Yeah. So there are a couple of different ways that you can qualify for a CDBG grant funds. So one is low income. So you can serve people who are low income, and you would have to test their income in that way in order to serve people with the CDBG grant. You can also serve areas that are low income, which is more where a business loan might come into place. If that business is serving a community that is a low income community, then of course you don't have to check people's income individually at that point. But those are the two different ways that you can go at it: serving a low income area or serving low income people wherever they might live.
I think I had asked the component of dollars. Are there different dollars to each type?
There are not, although this process input that we receive here this is going to determine the city's priorities for how it allocates funds among those different things. And so we're open to input on, we should spend more on small business loans, or we should spend less on that. This is the opportunity for us to hear.
Thank you.
Leave it up there. Richard Ryland, PUB. So it seems that the city has outsourced this application process to your firm, and that means you're an expert. Right? I understand, and we're going to see some numbers in a minute. Did I see some numbers flash up there? Oh, okay. So my question is a general one. In the process of applying for this sort of thing, for HUD, CDBG funds and that sort of thing, for cities this size, larger, smaller, is there an assumed parameter for how much you deserve at the federal level when they evaluate these things? Or is it kind of as much as you can get if you can justify it with arguments in your application? And to what extent are we exploiting the maximum amount you can get? Are we getting the maximum amount you can get? Could you talk about that in general, sort of like if you're coming in and we're the client and you're out to get as much stuff for us as you can, what are the limitations and what are the parameters that the evaluators use when you approach them? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. In the case of these grant programs, it's all determined by formula. So Congress appropriates a total amount for the CDBG program. HUD applies a formula, and that determines what Atlanta gets. We call these plans an application to HUD because the city won't get the funds if it doesn't send the plan saying what it expects to do with the funds. But the amount is set. Different things play into that formula. It's based on population. It's based on housing need. It's based on housing condition and quality. Lots of different factors get put into that formula. But the amount just comes to the city. It's directed by HUD. There's not really an opportunity to go to HUD and request additional funds under these programs. That's true, yes.
Last question, Mr. Carr.
Thank you, Steve Carr, NPW. I have a follow-up, get in the weeds question. You mentioned Congress. Now, since funding comes out of the House of Representatives, is that the only body, or does it have to go through both chambers and then get signed by Pres What's-His-Face? And the follow-up question to that is, can we individually lobby Congress people, like the head of a committee, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah, so it's federal spending, so it gets put into a spending bill. It goes through both houses of the Congress. The president has to sign the spending bill before that funding becomes available. You can lobby. You can lobby your representative. I believe the committee that governs spending under these programs is THUD, Transportation, Housing, Urban Development. That would be the way to go.
Thank you.
Great. Karen and Jeremy, thank you so much for coming to us. We'll make sure that your presentation gets out to the NPUs. Thank you. I understand we do have a quorum. I'm going to hold off on doing a roll call at this point and invite Commissioner Tim Keene to come. We are thrilled to see you. It's been a while.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I have been meaning to do this, especially since we started the new fiscal year, just to have a chance to talk to you about a few of the things we're working on and take your questions related to these or other things. But thank you for giving me this time. Let me go backwards here. This is the start. So I want to give you some of this you know probably, but just to make sure everybody knows this about the Department of City Planning. We produced the Atlanta City Design. It was included in the city charter in the fall of 2017. And I mention this to start because this work, which was the product of about an 18-month public process, is central to everything that we're doing. So as I go through different projects and programs or aspects of our work, I want to guide you to this document, which really is the basis for the work in the planning department and the way that we're working and the things that we're doing. Within Atlanta City Design, we established these 5 principles here. This is a really significant document, so I'm just touching the very tip of it here. It's quite a bit of work. These 5 principles, which the design goes into a fair amount of detail for each, and I'll talk about that as I go through the different aspects of what we're doing. One thing I should say about this, because I don't talk about it enough, and I'm thinking about it because we met with the Atlanta Public Schools this week, is one of the things that we did at the conclusion of this work is we asked the Atlanta Public Schools to develop a curriculum on Atlanta City Design for the public schools, and they did that. And so the middle school social studies curriculum team wrote a curriculum for the 8th graders that's based on Atlanta City Design, and it's a phenomenal piece of work. They took what is a fairly daunting, prescription for the city and essentially figured out how to explain it to 8th graders and then developed projects for them to work on so that they could learn it kind of in depth. And so we're meeting with them this week because we're going to produce a document that would be available to all schools. We get requests fairly frequently from schools to come to classes and talk on this topic. So this beautiful piece of work that the Atlanta Public Schools did will be made into a document that can be shared with anybody. This is the website where you can see the document. We have, of course, copies of the book here. We've already got 2 copies of the book in most of the public libraries, but they will all be there within the next couple of weeks. This is the department and how it's organized. We have 5 offices. I'll say that the Atlanta Planning Department is a little unusual in the sense that it is responsible for thinking about the city many years from now, 5, 10, 15, 30 years from now, and doing the planning, forward-thinking part of the city's work. But it's also responsible for administering permits and inspecting buildings, all the way from the concepts about the city's future down to the actual construction of a building. And that's not typical. There's a few departments like that in the country, but usually those things are split in different departments. And I personally think this way of working is the best way. The mission of the department has to do with many things, having to do with obviously the physical growth and development of the city, but aspects of housing, transportation, certainly neighborhoods, buildings, and central to all of this is the way that we treat Atlantans. This is a theme within the department that we talk about all the time and are always working on. It's something we have to be careful about every day in terms of how people are treated. And we deal with some fairly complex things. When you think about zoning and building codes and planning, this isn't something that people on a regular basis tend to, think about. So, and we have to be cognizant of that we are trying to make these things accessible and simpler for people, not more. It's easy to make things more complex. It's harder to try to help them simplify these complex systems, and that's how we think about our work. Very involved in the community. A few of the images, some from Cascade, which I'll talk about, where we've had our design studio until recently. We've been doing a lot of work in English Avenue. Recently, the planning department is one of the partners in Station Soccer. Now at West End, looking at moving next to Hamilton Home Station. Some things about our work. We flip through a few of these. Oh no, there you go. Okay, so among the things that we did when we really started focusing on the Office of Buildings and the permit process is we decided to eliminate the requirement for some permits. This is a list of those. And the thinking around this is that we are quick to add regulations. We're less quick to take them away. And this is a collection of things that required permits, some of which you will be shocked by probably, but that we felt was really unnecessary because they're not related to health and safety and those kinds of things. So requiring a permit for these things was just troublesome for people. And by the way, it caused more volume within the permit office and therefore helped with delays and things. So we eliminated these requirements. We analyzed how many of these kinds of permits that we issued every year, and it was many. Part of the reason we analyzed how many permits like this we issued is to see what the revenue impact would be if we eliminated the permits. And there was an impact of a few $100,000, but in the overall scheme of the permitting office, that's an insignificant amount. And to take this headache off of people was worth it. So we got rid of some permits that you were required to meet. We also reorganized the Office of Buildings to include an express lane and then teams that focused on different customer types. So we have an express lane, the idea being there should be some permits you can get over a lunch hour, 30 minutes is our goal. We have a residential team that works just on single family, light commercial team, smaller scale commercial, multifamily, and then commercial, which is the biggest projects. And so we started tracking how we do with each of those. This dashboard kind of shows you that. In the middle, express time permit. In the last fiscal year, we were at about 33 minutes per express lane permit. This past fiscal year, on average, we were at 26 minutes per express lane permit, right at where we want our goal to be. This is a very popular permit. People like express permits, almost too much, so we had to try to make sure that we don't get too many people in the express lane that really shouldn't be there because they have more complex things that cause problems in the field with inspectors. So you see up there on top the number of standard permits versus express permits. We have slightly less percentage. We're at about 25% of our permits being express lane. A little less than last year, but that was a good thing to get some people out of the express lane. We're also tracking how many plan review cycles it takes to get your plans approved. This was suggested to us by a customer because the practice in the past had been that you submit a set of plans for approval and you may end up submitting them 3, 4, 5 times before you actually get the stamp of approval. And there's a collection of reasons for that, but we decided to have the standard that we want to approve the permit, the plans, no later than the second submittal. And you see there on the bottom left, plan review cycles on average. Before we started this practice, 30 to 40% of the permits required 3 or more reviews, and we're down to less than 10%. Often it's 1% or 2% of the plan submittals require more than 2 reviews. So this is just a collection of ways we're tracking ourselves. We're tracking how many days it takes to get the first comments on your plan review. And so those two, how many days it takes us to get you your first comments and then how many cycles it takes, are the things that we're paying attention to make sure people are getting good service. Over the last 2 years, we issued more permits than any time in the city's history in each of the last 2 years. Here you see the construction valuation we permitted, and then also the actual number of permits. It's been, you know this, I mean, we all know it, that the city is developing quickly right now, and these are just numbers that confirm this, but so we have been focused on the reform of the permitting process at a time when the city is historically busy when it comes to construction. We got a collection of things we're working on to continue to refine this. In the permitting world, you're never finished creating a better process. This is a life's work. It's not something that's finished and then you move on. And among the things that will be very helpful is we're going to kick off electronic plan submittal soon. So we have a system, other cities have it, of course, where you can submit your plans online, and that includes the drawings themselves. So you don't have to come to City Hall if you don't want to, and under no circumstance do you have to bring big sets of rolled plans. So we've been doing training for staff, not just within the planning department, but other departments that are involved in permitting, like watershed, and are doing some testing right now with a few customers. We're starting with townhouses for a few reasons. So we'll start with townhouses and have that type of permit available through electronic plan submittal. Then we'll move to other types of permits, single family, more complex commercial permits. Our goal is that with over an 18-month period, we'll have all of the permit types available for electronic plan submittal. So this will be perhaps the most significant change for customers and eliminate a lot of the sometimes unnecessary trips to City Hall and so forth. This is just that vendor. More about that. So the other thing that we're really, this year will be a big one for us in terms of thinking about how we need to change our codes to make building affordably easier and using sustainable practices easier. You know, there's a lot of change happening, as you know, in the world of construction that deals with how we can produce housing in cheaper ways. This is an example here on Auburn Avenue, where the owner of this that was buying the building to renovate it really wanted to create units that were very affordable, and that manifests itself in different ways in which she was renovating the building and some of the systems she was using. Her process of permitting took too long, really, because we weren't used to these practices. And it's not that they were illegal, it's just that she was borrowing ideas from even other countries. It's an international building code, so these things are permitted. It's just that we weren't used to them. So we have to focus on making sure that we're prepared to make building affordably easier. So another aspect of this is zoning, and as you know very well, we've been through some zoning changes that were intentional. We did a diagnostic of the zoning ordinance and then proceeded with a couple of phases of zoning ordinance amendments that the city proposed, some of them having to do with housing diversity, the missing middle housing, and ADU, some of them having to do with parking, reducing parking, creating parking maximums in some locations. So we've been through a process of kind of strategically or surgically changing the zoning ordinance, which we'll continue to do. But we're also wanting to get going with the big zoning rewrite. You've probably heard about this more than you'd like to imagine, but we've been in a process to engage a team to help us with this. We're now nearing the end of that. We've been through 2 RFPs to try to get a team, a qualified team in to help us. We're nearing the end of that. So this will be a very significant process that will take 2 to 5 years. That's the case in other cities that have done complete zoning rewrites, because you're talking about potentially rezoning every property in the city. So it's a process that has to be a very public one, and we'll kick that off soon. We also have been working on better architecture. This is a hotel that was proposed at Peachtree and Ponce. This is the version that came out of a process that we had with the developer, where we told them that even though they could build what they wanted to under the zoning, we wouldn't let them because it was insulting. So we said no, and then came up with this, and this is now under construction. This has gone on, believe it or not. Somebody proposed to build this in downtown Atlanta near the Emory Hospital, and we said thank you, but no, and went through a process with them. And this was not to try to, none of these are, architecture for the ages. It was really just about trying to create something that people wouldn't be offended by, and would kind of blend in and do some simple things the way buildings and cities ought to do them. This cartoon was proposed on Marietta Street in the area where there's a lot of warehouse buildings and those kinds of things. We went through a process with them, and so we're giving them very specific suggestions as to what to do to change the building to make it less insulting. This was the parking garage. This is the Midtown Emory Hospital. They proposed, I'm not sure how many images I have here, but they want to consolidate their parking. They're leasing surface parking on 5 or 6 lots around Midtown into downtown, and they wanted to consolidate their parking for their employees so they weren't parking in all these surface parking lots and then shuttling them to the hospital, build a parking garage to handle those. So one of the great things about this process was Emory proposed this initially, which was unfortunate, but we came back, and to their credit, they really sat down with us and started over. And among the outcomes of this was that they committed to, by the time that they finished, that we went through a planning exercise with them. We said, let's step back here for a minute and look at your whole campus and figure out what you're doing, and try to take, because they said a lot of good things. It's just we've got to be more intentional about this. So freeing up these surface parking lots around for development, consolidating the parking is a good thing, having active use in the ground floor. But most importantly, one thing that they did was they committed to 100% subsidizing their employees' MARTA passes by the time that this garage gets a CO. Right now, a very small percentage of their employees use MARTA. And in their plan, and in this planning, they decided we really need 20 to 25% of our employees to be riding MARTA, because while we'll have this parking, their plans include a new hospital, as you know, at Peachtree and Linden. They include renovation and reuse of an old building at West Peachtree and Linden. They include some additional infill of medical office. So the density of medical type use here is going to be really high. So they cannot solve it with parking. Although this is part of the strategy, they need more people using MARTA, so they committed to 100% subsidy of their employees' MARTA passes. Coming up now is we're getting ready to start the first historic preservation strategy that the city's done since the 1980s, Future Places Project. You'll be invited to participate in this. We've got a couple of public meetings, and Leah can give you more on this if she hasn't already. Public meetings coming up in October, the first collection of those. This will go on for a few months, but we've been a little too reactive when it comes to preservation and have had success there. Places like the Engineers Bookstore, somebody wanted to build a gas station in that location. They were quite surprised when we designated that building, and they could not do that. The funeral home in Midtown, others, I won't go into all of them, the Plaza Theater, but those were all done kind of in reaction to the threat of buildings, which sometimes is necessary, and that can be good, actually, because people get motivated. But we'd like to be more forward-thinking and thoughtful about what the community most wants to preserve and what kind of techniques we need to use to preserve them. So a few of the things that we'll be doing during this project, it will be a very public one, of course, because when it comes to preservation, you can really go as far as the community wants to. I mean, this is not something, that we come in and say we're going to do. It's very much a community process that, to be successful, you've got to get a lot of community guidance and direction and support ultimately for regulations. Atlanta needs some help when it comes to the publicness of the city, and we're trying to do a few things to help with that. One is this placemaking program. You've probably heard about one of them. One of the pieces of it, the Jackson Street Bridge, has been in the news lately. These are a few of the things we've worked on so far. The pedestrian plaza on Broad Street. In Cascade, when we had our studio there, we wanted to do something at the intersection of Cascade and Beecher, and had a series of meetings with the residents to say, what would you like to see? We had thoughts about it, but they really focused on building a new bus stop there right at the main intersection, which is a very important bus stop on that Cascade line. So we, with them, designed something custom for them, and it's installed. And then on Virginia Highland, a little parklet type thing there, which has had limited use, and part of it is it's in the sun too much. And so we suspect we'll move that to somewhere else at some point and learn from that. That's what this is about. Not everything's going to be perfect, but we take what we have there and move it to another location. The Broad Street Plaza has gotten some awards, and one thing about the Broad Street Plaza is, just to make sure everyone knows this, it was intended as a temporary installation. The idea with it was that Broad Street had been closed to traffic, but in Great Atlanta Way, you could still drive there. I'm not sure how that happened. But anyway, so we wanted to stop that and figure out a way of making this truly pedestrian. And this was intended to be a few-year temporary way of doing it, and learn from this and then go on. I think as we look at Broad Street and Peachtree, there's other things happening that may lead us to different conclusions about how to do this. But in the meantime, this has been a really fascinating experience. In English Avenue, we've been focused around the intersection of Cameron Alexander and Brawley, the nonprofit and neighborhood association there. This image on the right came from their plan for English Avenue. There's an old church there, St. Mark's, that has the old stone walls there, and want to make that the centerpiece of kind of the main intersection in English Avenue. So we've been doing some programming with them, but we've also been making improvements to the sidewalks, and we're able to make some initial improvements to the church itself so that it can get better community use, and you'll hear more about this over the next few months. We right now are studying Peachtree Street and Peachtree Center. We have 10 or so teams that have proposed to work with us to get into the technical aspects of this. This is a proposal to create a shared street from Hardy Ivy Park to Margaret Mitchell Square. The point of this is the densest part of the city in some ways. I don't mean residential density, but just overall city density and intensity. We need more people living here, but part of what it needs is an urban place. For downtown Atlanta to be successful, it needs to provide urbanism. And so we wanted to get back to Peachtree Street and think about how it will function in the future, and this shared street work is towards that end. And once we get this team engaged, we'll start a public process around refining this idea and determining the technical feasibility of it, or the technical aspects of it that will need to be addressed in order for it to be implemented, how much it will cost, and all those kinds of things. But I think as we're looking at this back to Broad Street, looking from this part of the city down south on Peachtree to Broad and even further south, probably to Marietta, it will warrant rethinking how we're handling all of this. This is just an image of Peachtree in that area, the idea of a shared street. Station soccer, as I mentioned, we're at the West End station now, working with Soccer in the Streets to. This will be at multiple MARTA stations in the city, and it's a wonderful thing. The reason we're involved with this is because we felt like it was. I mean, Soccer in the Streets and station soccer is not just about soccer. It's really about community development and all the things that kids and vulnerable neighborhoods need to be happy and have options and learn and all that, and that soccer is a vehicle for that. But the other thing about it for us was that taking some of these leftover spaces at MARTA stations, that this space, for instance, was just a kind of gravel and dirt and patched grass place behind a chain link fence. It was not providing any public benefit, and so by coming in here and creating these soccer fields and having a public space, it's also making a better city, and we're thrilled to be able to do this. So we're working with Station Soccer in the Streets, that is, to look at the overall plan for a space like this, and we'll do this with them everywhere they go. So it's not just the soccer fields, it's more than that. We will be working closely with MARTA on all their investments in the more MARTA work that they'll be doing to improve transit, including the 5 Points MARTA station. Moving to nature here, you probably know we've been involved in this urban ecology study in Atlanta now for 18 months or so. The reason for doing it this way, part of it was city design. One of the principles, of course, is nature, the physical part of the city that connects everyone. And the importance of nature in Atlanta, to Atlanta being a distinctive place, that as the city's becoming more urban, nature should be protected and restored in that process, and can be. But studying it more in depth, and part of the outcome of that being a new tree ordinance. This is a image that shows you, the map shows you different city design areas. Get too deep into that, but on the left it kind of breaks the city down into different areas and what the existing percentage tree canopy we have within all those areas. So for instance, within urban neighborhood areas, in 2014 we found that about 50% of that area was tree canopied, and then you'll see a goal there of 55%. So we're trying to break down the city into different areas and what our tree canopy goals should be. For the purpose of then getting to the tree ordinance, we will have a first draft of a tree ordinance on November 1st, about November 1st, that last week in October, where November 1st is. We'll have a series of public forums around that, and then with the input we get then, we'll do a second version. So there's still some public process associated with the tree ordinance. Clearly, we haven't really gotten into the details of it yet. I will say this is a highly emotional process. This brings lots of emotion. The City of Atlanta's tree ordinance dates from 2001. There was an effort that started in 2007 to substantially rewrite it. In 2014, the product of that work was an ordinance that went to City Council and was held and never acted upon. So 7 years of work on a tree ordinance and nothing to show for it. This is a very emotional, complex process. We started with urban ecology in hopes that we could find completely different ways to work on regulating trees, and we'll see if we get there. I'm less optimistic than I used to be. The Chattahoochee River study that's going on right now, we're working on it with Cobb County, the Trust for Public Land, the Atlanta Regional Commission. They're studying a large section of the Chattahoochee. We're obviously concerned with Atlanta's frontage and how to provide better public access to the Chattahoochee in the process of protecting the river itself. They have a wonderful team working on this, and be much more about this soon. Part of the reason for all this goes back to city design, is trying to create a distinctive public realm in the city that is in part built around these intersections between nature and urbanism, and that where we have such things, we are intentional about how they're designed, and that we're giving people all over the city this amazing access to nature in whatever part of the city you live in. But as the city's becoming more urban, that will be very important. Here's an example of that. Piedmont Road at Peachtree Creek. You know about the south and north fork of the Peachtree Creek being worked on for public access. Piedmont Road needs to be as well. It's as harsh a road as you'll find. And so addressing both the urban part of it, Piedmont Road, and how it connects with Peachtree Creek will be part of a study we're doing this fall. Another example that's very active is the intersection of Hollowell Parkway and Proctor Creek, where just north of Hollowell, as you know, the first phase of the Proctor Creek Trail has been built. There's a proposal for a park on the south side of Hollowell. Lots of different things happening here, including some investment in the Bankhead MARTA station by MARTA. And so we're going to be kind of the ones that are ensuring that all these different projects result in something great for the city. Designing for affordability. Affordable housing is a big focus of ours. Some of you may have participated in our public sessions around the housing needs assessment. We'll have a draft of this available for public consumption here later this year. And this was really about trying to get very specific about, in the context of city design and the growth that the city's seeing. You all know we're growing more than the city has in a generation. What specifically should our goals be to address affordable housing specifically? And that's what this work is really about. We've also been doing other things through our design studio. Mostly this is a work we did with Cascade Heights and the neighborhoods around it, looking at how this Cascade Heights business district has the ability to do some redevelopment and infill development around it. We heard a lot in Cascade about wanting places for people that are getting older, that don't need a big house and yard, but still want to be in this area. That sentiment really drove this planning we did with the community to provide some of that housing, and looking at all different kinds of housing types. Obviously, single-family residential is the predominant type in this part and many parts of the city, but how can you get more housing diversity in a place like this in Cascade Heights? And we're also working closely with the City of Refuge to help them think about how they develop the properties around their campus, and excited about that on Boone. And they're serving, of course, very low-income people that are needing housing that would likely otherwise be homeless. And so we want to help them think through, again, we're working with them to help them plan the property, do the design work, engage, help them with the funding, finding the funding they need, all the way through development. The point of ours being that we want to help people figure out how to build more affordable housing with the same amount of resources, and do it beautifully at the same time. Soon there'll be an RFP on the street for, and I chuckle to say that, but the property across the street, the city owns. This is part of the process of trying to use city assets to further affordability and provide some leadership when it comes to affordability in the city, seeking a developer partner to build affordable housing across the street from City Hall. All these things are part of a new kind of charge we've given to our design studio. To Housing Innovation Lab is not a great title, but have them focused on helping people not do design work for people, although we will do that, but really trying to create models in the city that we can, as a planning department, take all the way from zoning and permitting and inspections on through development and help people produce more affordable housing. When it comes to mobility, city adopted a new transportation plan almost a year ago. It's acknowledging that we have to shift from so much driving to other modes of transportation. And, for example, going from 17% transit walk bike trips to 35%, that's a big change. We have now, which we didn't have then, lots of people getting around on dockless things, including scooters, as you know. Over the first 5 months of this year, we had almost 3 million rides on scooters. And one thing I'll say about that is that there's been multiple studies in other cities that show that rides on scooters and other things, e-bikes, 30% of them would have otherwise been car trips. So if you take our 3 million or so dockless rides over 5 months, that removes almost 700,000 car trips. So the point is just that I think there's a sense of urgency around our streets now that we didn't have before because of how many people are getting around in different ways. We've got to be careful about it. We started permitting them in January. When those permits come due in January of next year, we'll have a whole different system for how we regulate this. We have been working on the Campbellton corridor and the mall. Some images from that, which are critical in terms of connecting not just the investment in the infrastructure and transit, for instance, but also the redevelopment or development of density around where we're making those investments. We've been doing a lot of things at the kind of neighborhood scale at Cascade, of course, where we had the studio for quite a while. We work with the business owners in that area. This is actually the West End. But in Cascade, we developed a grant program. So we worked with the businesses through the studio to help them design what kind of improvements they'd make to their storefronts. And then we had a grant program that we could offer them funding to then make those improvements. So we did it in Cascade first. Then we worked with the businesses in the West End to do the same thing. So we want to continue this in these small little neighborhood districts in the city. We just started a Main Street program in Atlanta, which will be targeting these super important little neighborhood business districts, which are so critical to Atlanta neighborhood quality of life. And got a fellowship program we started with people within these Main Street districts of the city, and just getting that going. Let's see. And then just how important the publicness of our processes are. This is the studio. Really, we did the studio to be the centerpiece of the planning department's outreach in the community, and not just that we have public meetings to explain things. We have those, but that we also have kind of a retail place in the community where we can do way more than just have traditional public meetings. And that has taken many, many forms. And I think we want the approach through the studio to spread more throughout the planning department and be more open to ideas and solutions and creativity in all that we do. Through the studio itself, from the Center for Civic Innovation in the past year, did receive the Civic Impact Award. The studio just recently moved to this location, which is on South Broad Street in downtown. We had our opening this week. We've got a lot of programming coming up at the studio, so Leah certainly can guide you to the places where you can kind of stay up to date. Some of these things happen during the day, some of them happen at night, but they're consistently happening. So if you miss something, you can always come back, because it's going to happen again, and find a time to join us there. And that is it for me. So that's just a little bit of what we're working on, and I'd be happy to answer questions about those things or anything else for that matter.
Great. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Terry, do you want to lead us off here? We've got about 10 minutes for questions.
I'll keep it short then. My first question is about mixed income communities, which was supposed to be the objective as we pursue affordable housing around the city of Atlanta. I mean, we know affordability is relative to location, but it appears that what's occurring here is the concentration of the poor and impoverished on the south side and the west side of the community, and the affluent on the north side and the east side of the community. And planning's planning's changes have had an impact on that. And so I'd like to know how we're going to address that. And then also I'd like elaboration on the quality of life districts, please.
Well, as far as we're concerned, the best neighborhood has a whole incredible variety of people living in it, from poor people to people that are working service industries to wealthy people. And, we have a condition in Atlanta that's existed for a long period of time over the North and the South. And our emphasis right now, honestly, is in protecting affordability on the West and the South. I will say that clearly. The market will take care of wealthier people and their housing. Our focus, we feel very strongly, needs to be on protecting poorer people and their housing, and especially on the South and the West. And we're working with partners on this. We're doing, I showed you multiple examples of what we're doing with those partners, and we're doing it from a regulatory standpoint. You know about inclusionary zoning, of course, other things that we're doing to try to enable more affordability in the city. There is nothing that's why I highlighted it in my presentation. There's nothing more important to us than mixed income communities. Mixed income communities is the outcome that we're seeking. Right now, we got to protect poorer people in the city, as far as I'm concerned, because without doing that, there'll be too much displacement. And in every case we can do it, in every way we can do it. One of the things we did this on the west side, I hope you know about this, the concern on the west side, west of Northside Drive, that people that own their property and for many years who are low income would be displaced by increased property taxes. The city did something that's never been done in any other city, which is to create a fund to support the increased taxes for those people. And now you hear the stories of people in those neighborhoods saying, we'd be gone if not for this. So every new idea, everybody's idea, and this has to do with regulation, it has to do with ways we can help finance, this has to do with the engagement we have with partners, is about ensuring as little forcible displacement in the city as we possibly can. And that is very much our focus right now. What is quality? Yeah. The zoning part. Yeah. Well, quality of life district was created.
You'll have to speak. You'll have to speak at the mic to make sure we catch it.
Yeah. So the quality of life districts were created. That would have been in the early 2000s, and so it's taking what was learned from the quality of life districts and applying that to more parts of the city. And I think that will be a big part of what you'll be talking about, we'll be talking about certainly in the bigger zoning rewrite.
First, I want to compliment you on what an incredible shopping basket of stuff you've got going. Very impressive, and I think you should be praised for that. No,
Welcome to APAB.
A human being can only do so much. However, to step back a minute, you're clearly a designer. You're clearly interested in improving the physical environment, the urban design quality with all of the cultural amenities that are inside the city, and I think that's great. And I'm all for it. That's my profession. But there's two huge juggernauts coming down the track that's going to crush the future generation. One is climate change, and the other is the exclusivity of central cities where, coincidentally, all the things you're doing to make the inner city of Atlanta wonderful are going to end up becoming inaccessible to the majority of the population because, as The price of housing goes up. People just can no longer afford to be in this wonderful environment that's being created. Certainly true in places like Manhattan, San Francisco, whatnot. We're just kind of a little behind the curve on that. So at the occasion of this new zoning ordinance, and by the way, climate change is going to force people from the coasts inland, and they're going to end up here. So my question is, at the occasion of the zoning rewrite, how innovative, how pushing the envelope are you going to be in creating new housing types that, because essentially the cost of housing is a function of square foot costs, are way below the standards that have been established for generations, that will allow people, housing affordability is a function of cost. And I'm not talking about just excluding people from the bottom end of the socioeconomic scale. I'm talking about millennials who can't afford to buy a house in the city, who are definitely angry about it. And in Minneapolis, they're outlawing single-family houses, right? So how aggressive are you going to be in trying to promote this? I know it's a hard thing to sell, and a lot of the communities don't want it. But in order to make all this stuff you're doing accessible, so the ticket to get into the amusement park is not so high that nobody can pay it, what are we going to do? And what do you have in mind for that?
Well, that was an easy question. I mean, come on.
And the clock is ticking.
A few things about that. One is that I think every city's different, and in Atlanta's case, what you described about a center city being so off limits to people, I think is a little different in Atlanta's case for this reason. There are not many people living in downtown Atlanta. And in a region of 6 million, the population of downtown is almost nothing in such a big place. And I think Atlanta is almost the opposite of these cities that you're talking about, Manhattan and San Francisco and places like that, where the vibrancy and growth and development of downtown will help with the affordability of the city, because it will take pressure off places that are, more vulnerable to gentrification and so forth. In the case of downtown Atlanta, building there and many, what you're doing in downtown Atlanta when you build new is you're building on a surface parking lot, or you're occupying a vacant building. I don't mean in every case, but I'm just saying that look at downtown Atlanta, and the capacity for growth and population there is phenomenal. And that makes it more accessible. And other cities you're getting into, when you're going to Center City, you are displacing people and you're making it less accessible. I think in Atlanta's case, it's really the opposite. And I think that Atlanta, the hardest things that we have to do are made easier with more people. As hard as affordability is, as hard as mobility is, they're easier with more people. And the other places you mentioned and other cities, the biggest problem is they try to stop growth. They say more people's bad, and they make it less affordable. And so that's our focus. When it comes to the zoning rewrite and how far we'll push on innovation as it relates to housing, we'll push very far. And while Minneapolis has not outlawed single family, that is a big discussion in this country, is how do we ensure that our neighborhoods can change in ways that enable this kind of affordability, but not in ways that are foreign to those places. And for me, that's us challenging each other and these neighborhoods and communities to say, how can we change? Because it's not right to say that we're not changing anymore, that we're static. That leads to these problems. And I think in that zoning rewrite, we'll get very specific about how can our neighborhoods change and where, in ways that are aggressive around affordability, and new construction techniques that deal with materials and smaller units and all the things you mentioned that are necessary to bring to bear in order to have any chance of succeeding and providing housing in the city.
I have several questions, comments that I'd like to wrap up all in one, and you can pick and choose what you want to address.
Steve, I'm going to ask you to try and keep it really brief so that everyone has an opportunity to speak. And I'm not picking on you, but on everyone. I'm addressing this to everyone in line because we want to make sure we respect our time. And there's one up here as well. So, okay.
Number one is I would like to get a copy of the presentation. Number two is I had heard that y'all were going to come over to East Atlanta to set up a design studio. And then I find out you're over on Broad Street, and it would seem to me is that why not couple with Georgia State University? They're planning whatever they have over there and do a combination thing. Number three is I want to get educated on affordable housing. I've been asking about this for years, and I'm still not, or at least not to my satisfaction. I own property on the Beltline. I own a fair amount of property on the Beltline. I want to develop preferably 100% affordability, even though that might be pie in the sky. I still need to get educated on it before I go too much further. I've been asking repeatedly, and I'm still not making any progress. So please.
Let me interrupt you. There is going to be a housing forum next month following this meeting that should address some of your questions.
I hope. I'm optimistic, too. The city's stated or unstated goal is to more than double the population by 2030. We need to have education, developers seminar for affordable housing, educate future and present developers, as well as bring in the NPU people, too, so that we all know what's going on. And we can make some, hopefully, lockstep or coordinated progress. And I think that's enough to toss out for you to...
Well, the design studio, we did look at different locations, including East Atlanta, and decided on downtown just because of the collection of things that are happening in downtown and the opportunity for us to help shape that. We will move it around the city, though, continue to do that. East Atlanta is a likely location for it at some point. We have other places we're looking at. The population number you mentioned, city design was built on a population to design the city for 1.2 million people, but it wasn't date specific intentionally. It's about how big are we designing the city for, but we're going to have projections in terms of population in 10-year increments. So that number is not a 30-year number. It's over the next generation of growth. How much will we grow? You mentioned the housing forum that's coming up. Of course, this is a huge emphasis of the mayor's, and the first time the city has Terry Lee now in the mayor's office focused on affordability, and probably something maybe that should be discussed at this meeting, as Terry is as smart and versed in these issues as anybody in the country.
Hello, Jamie Gentry, MPUE. Good presentation. Thanks for all you do. My observation is that the system within city planning is set up great when the permissions that are granted are compliant with the actual use. MPUE has a good deal of high density, and a single zoning violation has the ability to harm quality of life for hundreds of residential units. Issuing thousands of new permits and even via more through the express process is certainly exciting stuff, but as it relates to existing zoning-related conditions, meaning previously approved applications and situations where actual land use is in conflict with applicable zoning code, it's my understanding that land use-related complaints are sent to Office of Buildings, but there's a lot of confusion once Office of Buildings receives that complaint if it's related to zoning. So my question is, how many zoning inspectors are on staff, and does this meet the actual demand? And secondly, are there available resources available to complainants when city planning has inspected the alleged noncompliance of land use, possibly even issued zoning correction notices, yet the noncompliance continues at the property and additional enforcement action is warranted?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point, and we have 6 positions designated for zoning enforcement, which isn't enough, I don't think. Some of those positions are currently vacant. We have a significant issue around recruitment and hiring of people. This is a time when it is difficult to recruit people, and but I think it's a fair point that we should focus on code enforcement There's a threshold, where how much is the community willing to spend on it, that will be important. But I think even beyond that, with the resources we already have, we should do a better job of it. I think that should be something that we really focus on. I know it's a frustration for everybody, including us. I will also say, however, that all the time that we do enforcement, there are, this, but practices we have to follow to protect the owner of the property too, which tend to take time and can be frustrating, and people can be ingenious about how they violate zoning ordinances and other things, and we spend a tremendous amount of time beyond those six positions in enforcement related, including myself, in enforcement related matters, because few people, are so intent on that. And so it is a struggle. It will always be some struggle, but I think we should focus on how we can improve that system, make it more known where we are with these different zoning violation enforcement actions, and be more communicative to you and people about what's happening when it comes to these things.
Thank you. Jim, and then Eric, and then I'm going to have to shut down the questions so that we can get through the rest of the agenda.
Yes, Jim Martin, MPUD. I asked you essentially that same question that was just asked when you first arrived at the city, and you gave essentially the same answer. We don't do zoning enforcement in this city. I have zoning complaints that are now going on 20 years old, and I can't even get zoning enforcement officers to answer my emails. It's not just a problem, it's sort of pathetic. But that wasn't the question I came up here to ask. The question I came up here to ask was about the land use compatibility chart. So we get referred to the MPU, we get future land use map changes in the CDP, we get zoning changes, we get citywide zoning ordinances, but when the land use compatibility chart changes, we hear nothing about it, and yet that has a profound impact on both of those things. And so I'm curious as to what process is followed when that is done and why it isn't being referred to the MPU.
What was which part of that was pathetic? The
That was the commentary. The question was about the land.
Okay, I prefer the commentary actually to the question. The land use compatibility matrix. Okay, how is it changing?
So it was changed last year, and I'm not sure what the process that was followed in order to make that change was. But at the MPU level, we were not given those changes as review and comment. We were not given them as a business item. We were not even told they were being made. So we only sort of coincidentally found out about it when zoning applications came through, and suddenly the chart we had wasn't up to date anymore.
Okay, well, we'll have to check on this chart and how this came about, Leah.
Okay. Mr. Martin, this is also the first time I'm hearing of that, but as Commissioner Keene said, we'll definitely look into that and get back to you on it.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. Eric Toomer, NPUQ.
He was in line before you got in line. Okay.
Again, Eric Toomer, NPUQ. Your presentation was really great, but throughout the entire presentation, I found one item that I thought was missing, or maybe it's not in your jurisdiction, and that is in the low-income housing in particular. They are normally the victims of crime or the first ones to be victimized. As our police chief stated, the people in the Buckhead area, they have the voice of the politicals to bring bearing on that, but the low-income people do not. It's really more of a request. In your planning, and every part of it, can you include public safety within your planning? Because I think that's where the safety component starts in the planning, because what we have in most urban areas is the building of neighborhoods, with the exception of subdivisions, are normally open to crime being perpetrated. So can you include that as part of your insight in your planning? Thank you.
Morning. How you doing? My name is Edward Smith. I represent NPUG and Proctor Creek Stewardship Council. And I just have a couple of questions for Tim King. I'm born and raised in Atlanta. So Broad Street and downtown look very nice, but it's actually mostly done by Georgia State. You know, Georgia State pretty much bought all of downtown. You know, the Beaudry Ford buildings, the Rialto. You know, pretty much Georgia State is downtown. So I remember coming downtown as a kid and going to Rich's, going to Macy's, riding the Pink Pig. And, you know, downtown, you know, I like what you did with downtown, but at the same time, is that a sustainable model? Because a lot of times when you finish college, you go back home to wherever you're from. You know, Atlanta's a transplant city. So you come here, go to school, then you go back. So, you know, I'm not thinking that that's a real sustainable model because, you know, you look at San Francisco. Most of the people live outside of San Francisco, in Oakland, Pittsburgh, and they have to drive into town. And every time you drive into town, you pay $5. So it's only a matter of time before we get to that point. And so my other thing is, I understand this tree canopy thing, but at the same time, when developers are coming in and they're taking all the trees, you know, a lot of the trees now, it's going to be kind of hard to hit that 50% or 55% that he wants to hit. And so I just want to know what type of sustainable things he wants to do to try to keep the tree canopy going, and is that a sustainable thing for downtown? Because, like I said, you know, most of it is just Georgia State. You know, most people don't come downtown to go shopping. You know, just be honest. You know, I like to live in reality, not hope. You know, hope is, you know, the audacity of hope. You know, so just, you know, we have to be honest with ourselves. You know, downtown, you know, it's nice and everything, but, you know, it's not going to be affordable. You know, our city is the only city pretty much in America where the outskirts was costing more than to live on the outskirts was costing more than live on the inside. So other people from other cities see that, like Chicago, Detroit, come down here. So now the whole city on the inside is actually, like, the city is on fire. Like, the property values here within Atlanta, if you have an Atlanta address, I don't care what part of Atlanta you're in. If you're in the south side, east side, west side, the whole city is on fire. So people will tell you, like, oh, nah, you know, the property value, or we're heading for a recession. But I think we're not for that.
Thank you for your question and comment.
Okay.
We'll give Commissioner the last word.
Downtown Atlanta, Atlanta's interesting to me. Atlanta is like, well, we have these terrible highway streets everywhere, and we must always have them. We have a vacant downtown, and we must always have it, because that's Atlanta. Why? We're deciding to do that. This isn't hope. Walk around where the studio is in South Downtown and look at all the surface parking lots. Are you kidding me? The future of the city is dependent upon downtown thriving. We've already invested in all the infrastructure. This isn't hope. This is observation. This is look at other cities, look at this city, and how must we carefully, intentionally grow as a city to become a better one. And that is, downtown is central to this. Don't anyone believe that what we have must always be. Issues around affordability are going to be, every city in this country, big and small, is challenged with this issue, and we will be. But a baseline way of measuring ourselves will be on the success of downtown Atlanta and the investments we make there. And by the way, the city we have now didn't just happen. People did it. In some cases, a few people decided this is what we will have. And we as a city can decide to have something else. When it comes to tree canopy, to get to the 50% goal is a combination of things. It's not just regulating trees on private property. If we only do that, we'll never be successful, because trees will come down. But it's planting new canopy. It's protecting forests that otherwise would be developed, and we will be bringing properties like that to City Council to protect. And so it's a whole combination of things to get you to the 50%. The only reason we broke it down by area is because as a whole city, it's hard to understand how to even begin to address this. When you break it down into smaller increments, you can start seeing where you can have success. For instance, in the core of the city, our tree canopy is a very small percentage, of course. And that's an area where we can have great success. Why in Atlanta do we not pay more attention to our streets when it comes to tree canopy? We tend to just think about private property as the tree canopy. But in many cities, the streets are a huge part of the tree canopy. And so to get to the 50% goal, it's not just regulating trees on private property. It's a whole collection of things, and that's why we did the urban ecology work. Thank you for having me.
No,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you for being here. And let me thank you also for Leah and for Daniel. They've been
Thank
they've
you
been
for bringing
absolutely
that up.
fabulous and making a great difference for the NPUs.
Thank you for bringing that up. And Leah started fairly recently with this, and I think her and Daniel are an amazing team. They are great public servants and
I would agree.
care about this in ways that all people in Atlanta should be grateful for. So we're certainly grateful to have them doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, it's time for us to get to work. We're going to do two things. First, I want to take a quick roll call to confirm that we have a quorum so that we can consider a couple pieces of business. After we establish the quorum, I'd like a motion to extend the meeting for an additional 15 minutes. We started late, 15 minutes late because we didn't have a whole lot of folks here. So the penalty is that we extend the meeting so that we can complete the agenda. Okay? Going through the roll call, I'm just going to call the NPU. If you're here representing it, please let me know. NPU A, NPU B, Richard's here, NPU C, NPU D, Jim Martin is here, NPU E, great, Jamie is here, NPU F, that would be me, NPU G, you are Sonia. Thank you, Sonia. Glad to have you here. NPU H. Ms. Hubbard's here. NPU I. She just walked out of the room. Eunice Glover is here in the hallway. Thank you. NPU J. NPU K. NPU L. And from NPU L. NPU M. NPU N. NPU O. NPU P, present. I'm sorry, I can't. Rasheen? Great, thanks, Rasheen. NPU Q, walking out of the room. Thank you, Eric. NPU R, NPU S, NPU T, Terry Ross is here. NPU V, thanks, Columbus. NPU W, Steve Carr is here. He's back as a delegate. Thank you. NPU X. Great. Thank you. You're Ruben, right? Great. Thank you. NPU Y. Okay, great. Thank you. And NPU Z here. Great. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 15 NPUs present. Thank you. Now, can I have a motion to extend the meeting till 12:15? Great. Thank you. And there's a second. All those in favor, please raise your hands. One vote per NPU. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Eric, are you raising your hand? 13 in favor. Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Great. That motion carries. Thank you. Now I've lost my notes. First thing to consider on the agenda, and I have lost my notes. Here we go. Are the two resolutions. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jim Martin. It's his committee that's bringing those forward.
Okay, thank you. We had both of these for discussion last month, so you should all be familiar with them. The first of these is referring to the process by which appeals are handled by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Essentially, they have created a requirement of legal standing in order to hear an appeal of an administrative decision that does not exist in the code and should not exist. And because of this, they are essentially taking the voice away from community groups who can not establish standing, and therefore they will not hear the facts of the appeal of an administrative decision, but rather will dismiss it summarily. And so we are calling for that to be done away with and for them to go back to the way they used to do business, which is to decide appeals of administrative decisions solely based on the underlying zoning facts. Questions? Questions at the microphone?
You'll have to go to the microphone. Gloria.
I wasn't reading. I was summarizing. But you have before you a resolution calling for the Office of Zoning and Planning to modify processes. Pardon me? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. There were copies on the front table. I'm sorry. What?
If
there were copies on the front table when I came in. I don't know if they were all picked up or not.
I've got a. You can have my copy. I've got another.
I mean, I can.
Anyone need a copy?
I can read through the full text if you'd like me to. No.
Don't.
Oh, okay.
To summarize it, basically, if there's an administrative action at the BZA, and someone wants to appeal it, right now, the way it stands, the policy at the BZA is unless you're a direct participant in the case, you cannot appeal the administrative decision, which completely eliminates the possibility of a neighborhood association or some other affiliated group which has legal standing and an interest in the case but is not a direct participant in the case from being able to appeal it. That was not the policy for 25 years before, or like 5 years ago, but about 5 years ago, an attorney for Walmart kind of convinced the BZA that that's the way they should do it, and they've been doing that ever since. What Jim wants to do is go back to the old situation where an interest group, neighborhood association, would have standing and could appeal an administrative decision by the BZA. And I think I'm in favor of it. I don't know anybody in the neighborhood association, in the NPUs, that is not in favor of this. So I think we should vote for it and move on.
Is there a motion?
This is coming out of committee, so it doesn't require a second.
It doesn't require a second. Okay. Are there any comments or questions or concerns regarding this resolution? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hands. One vote for NPU. I count 11 in favor, 12 in favor, 13 in favor. Okay, thank you. Those opposed to this resolution? I see 0. Anyone abstaining from the resolution? The motion carries. The resolution will be sent to council, and we probably need to do a little bit of lobbying in front of council to do that. Next resolution.
Okay, so the next resolution pertains to trees and the way that enforcement of the tree ordinance is handled. Essentially, what we have is 2 arborists, one in the Office of Buildings, one in the Office of Parks. Trees that sit on city land are the purview of the arborist in the Office of Parks. They're great at cutting them down, but they don't seem to believe in enforcing the ordinance against the illegal construction or destruction of those trees or protecting them in construction processes. And so what the resolution is calling for is for those tasks to be transferred to the arborist in the Office of Buildings, who seems to do a better, albeit imperfect, job of enforcing the ordinance. So that's about it. Questions?
Questions, and that would be your motion, right? Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat who has current enforcement duty?
Okay, so if the tree is on private property, currently it is the arborist in the Office of Buildings who has the authority to enforce the ordinance. So if you were to cut it down illegally, they would come out and cite you for it, for example. Or if you wanted to cut it down, you would go to them and apply for a permit. If the tree is in the right-of-way, so if it's on city property, it would be the arborist in the Parks Department. Okay? And if you cut that tree down, you get away with it because you can't get the arborist in the Office of the Parks Department to do anything about it. So that's the system that we're hoping to change.
It's not only cutting down, it's also when there's any kind of construction going on, well, they'll put equipment on top of it, they'll roll machinery over the top of it. The trees are just being abused and not protected during the construction. So there is a motion from the CDHS Committee of APAB to support this resolution. That does not require a second. Are there any other questions regarding it? Questions or concerns regarding the motion or the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. 1 vote per NPU. I count 15 in favor of the motion to support. Those opposed? I see none. And anyone abstaining? The motion carries. This also will go to City Council. The next item for vote by the for consideration for the NPU is a proposed bylaw change. This is coming from the Bylaws Committee, which is chaired by Eric Toomer. Eric passed out a copy of the bylaws, I believe.
We have a microphone. Okay. What the delegates have is they have a accepted version of the changes. When I say accepted, meaning that it does not show the changes. Then separately you have a couple of pages that actually highlight the changes and what they were. The executive board, however, has a complete copy of the changes as Word presents it, and the same where I accepted the changes, anticipating that we would approve it. And basically, the changes are on page 2. It's basically stating that the when we do present a nominating committee, well, it's section 3, 1 and 2, when we have a nominating committee suggesting or taking up the nominations for the next year's officers, that they do not canvass for the people that they are presenting. That's it in a nutshell. And in essence, I can't be on the nominating committee and say, Eric Toomer's a good guy, vote for Eric Toomer. That's in essence right there. So that's first part. Debbie, did we want to take these as individuals
or
I think we need in whole? Okay.
So the Bylaws Committee is recommending a change to Article 5, Section 2, which would...
That's actually a section.
Section 3, I'm sorry, which would prohibit the nominations committee from campaigning for their nominees, a specific nominee. Okay, that's moved. How big is your committee?
It's the executive board. We handle it.
So we're fine without a second. Are there any questions or concerns regarding this change to the bylaws? Y'all thinking about that before we make the change? Okay. Okay.
Madam President, I have a question.
I'm sorry, where's the question?
Right here.
There, thank you.
I'm sorry. While I agree with this, I think that somewhere in here we need to state what will happen if that does happen, if the campaigning does happen. Just a general statement that that person can and will be removed from the nominating committee or something to that effect.
What I would suggest is that is a great idea. one of the things that I would like to do is go forward with this and add that to the next change, because we have a revolving change schedule for our bylaws. So if you're in agreement with this, we can make note, and the next go-round, we'll add that to it.
Yeah, this really is not a change of practice, but a clarification in that the bylaws were somewhat ambiguous on the question. And I believe it came up when we nominated Eunice last year, because she was a member of the committee but had not done anything to seek office, and it was an office that no one had put in their name for. And so the question was, could she accept the nomination from the floor at that time, being a member of the committee? And we decided that the bylaws were sort of silent on that because of the ambiguity, and so this just clarifies that.
So does that mean, for my own edification, if a member of the nominating committee is nominated for a position not from the nominating committee, would that person be able to serve?
Yes, and it actually states in Part 2 that or somewhere in there, that it's a nomination from the floor. So they can't self-nominate prior to the actual nominating committee agenda.
Okay. Yes.
Rasheen Hunter, MPUP. My, I guess, concern about this is, the one thing is, underneath committees in this that you just handed out, the nominating committee is not listed. So my question would be, well, what is the purpose? Why isn't that outlined what the nominating committee does? I see executive public safety, and it goes on down, but we should actually include that in the committee section of our bylaws, especially if we're having rules, even though they only serve one purpose, and it's a short purpose.
Do you have do you have the full version of the bylaw?
I have what he just handed out.
Because Section 2 specifies the role of the nominating committee.
I'm talking about underneath the Article 7, which specifies all committees.
Yeah, I believe Article 7 specifies all standing committees, and we have interpreted the nominating committee as an ad hoc rather than a standing committee.
And so, but my guess, my thing is, when you are making rules about an ad hoc committee, when ad hoc committees are created by the chair and the rules are set when you create them, that's kind of...
Jim, I think that's something we can easily change, and again, we can add that to the list.
I think that it should be added to the list, number one.
If everybody's in agreement, I am. I see no problem with it.
And the other thing, too, is I'm very familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, and there are some versions of nominating committees where they actually come back and they decide, you can change it, who they think are best for a position, so that will be in conflict. So I think that's why we need to maybe add some more meat in terms of what do you want the committee to do, because there are several versions of nominating committees in Robert's Rules of Order.
Maybe you can get with me, and we can work out some wording on that. Okay?
More than happy to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there not a conflict between being a candidate and also presiding over the nominating process? There's not a conflict?
Let me answer that. So here's our dilemma. There are only 25 members of APAB. Technically, a total of 50 are available, delegates and alternates, but generally we only have about 25 people that are part of the core. So it's really hard to find nominating committee members and then candidates that are separate. We've got to kind of work together. So limiting them could cause us a problem with having nominating committee members or finding officers that can serve. Does that make sense? Yeah, and you can add.
It also handles it where you can't self-nominate prior to the day of presentation, where somebody can nominate you on that day from the floor when we're calling for a vote on that particular office. And I think that kind of helps us along where we don't have the conflict.
And again, I would point out that if we don't make this change, we will be operating under these rules because the bylaws are silent on the issue. So we're merely clarifying something, we're not changing something.
Good point.
Yes, and the point is that a lot of times we have an open office with no nominee on the actual day of the election. and we fill the offices sometimes right then. And so sometimes it might be a person who's on the committee. We just want to make sure we can still do that.
Is there any more discussion on this change? Seeing none, all those in favor of the change in Section 3, is that Article 5? Article 5, Section 3. Please raise your hand. One vote per NPU. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 13. I count 13. Anyone opposed to the motion? That's 1. And any abstentions? Thank you. You're 1 and 1. So the motion carries by a vote of 13 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention. Is it Article 7? I can't tell. Is this the term?
Yeah, it's the term. That's Section 5, term limit. Thank you. And basically, is all it does is it sets out that the parliamentarian is not under any limitation for repeating holding the office. And the logic behind that was that when we have a good parliamentarian, we want to ride that horse till he drops.
Any questions about that recommendation? So nothing else changes other than establishing that the parliamentarian can serve till death. Or until his NPU no longer wants him as a delegate or an alternate. Okay. There is a motion that has come forward from the Bylaw Committee requiring no second. All those in favor of making this clarification, please raise your hand. 1 vote per NPU, please. Oh. I count 13 in favor. Those opposed? 2 are opposed. Is there anyone abstaining? 1 abstention. The motion does carry, and you're stuck, Jim. Regarding that last motion? Please come to the mic so we can all hear.
My question was, is there, maybe I've missed it and didn't see it in the bylaws, eligibility in terms of attendance? Is there something that sets out the eligibility criterion for executive office, like minimum attendance, et cetera? There is?
Each office has its own requirements, and it is in there what the requirements are.
But there are no attendance requirements for the officers, if that's what you're looking for.
That's my question, and maybe on a revisit that may be considered a minimum attendance requirement.
Okay, so the other one passed, and I got one more.
One
more on page 6, section 11. This is dealing with our ongoing quorum problem. And basically, we have a problem with quorums, therefore we cannot handle business. Jim Martin was so kind to give us a statistic on what the average attendance is, and we're lowering the quorum to that number, which is 11, as opposed to 13. And that is section 5.
Okay, we discussed this proposal a couple months ago. Because of the issue we've been having with quorum, we've actually been doing a lot better about every other month to establish a quorum, but 11 seems to be about where we are in terms of what we get. We do have 2 NPUs that choose not to engage with APAB at all, so that kind of drops us from 25 to 23 NPUs represented. Are there any questions or concerns about lowering the quorum requirement? Yeah, you're going to have to come to the microphone.
I think there was a no to the question of whether you could use both the delegate and the alternate in satisfying a quorum. I think we asked that before, and I believe the answer was there was lack of equity or something in that process. Is that correct? Because oftentimes we had the numbers there. It's just that you had two from the same NPU, and I think there was some response, but I just put that back out there again.
Basically, what I was doing on this was we had so much conversation and so many suggestions, and we did not come to a specific other than that we needed to do something for a quorum, and this is a stopgap measure. If we want to go in more detail, we have to continue the conversation at the executive board meeting level, and if we come up with something that says this is what we want to do rather than making the number 11, we will make that change at that time. This is for expedience to get the job done, and I'm in hopes that that will pass based on that.
Yes, sir.
So we have, you said, 23 NPUs that participate. So traditionally, a quorum is a simple majority, right?
Right.
So I say the number there should be minimally maybe 12 based on that. The thing is that we also have to think about this by the numbers. So if we're making the quorum 11, that means that business before this body can now be passed minimally with 6 votes. That's what we're saying.
We understand that.
And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we need to just continue to work with our NPUs to get representatives in here and push. But I think that we're lowering the standard, which could basically deny the rights of other people who are in the body. And we need to be careful with that.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else have any comments? The motion from the Bylaws Committee is to reduce the requirement for a quorum from 13 to 11. That does not require a second. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we're going to vote on this requirement change. All those in favor of making the change? Okay.
Probably should ask this question starting out. So in order to amend our bylaws, does it only require a simple majority, or is it higher? Because usually it's higher.
It's actually 2/3 of the quorum.
Okay.
And our quorum is 15 today, so 10 votes will be required in order for it to pass. Mr. Carr?
Thank you. We're voting now on the present question of a number, going from 13 to 11. The real issue here is responsibility. If somebody volunteers or gets elected or selected, they need to show up. They need to be responsible about their, call it an obligation, call it their civic duty, you can call it whatever you want, but they need to be responsible. And I would like for some type of research activity to figure out how we can get people to do what they're supposed to do. I guess if we answer that question, we've taken care of civil life, haven't we? But in any case,
thank you.
Please put that on the table sometime, somewhere.
Great, thank you. And there are some things in motion to help increase participation in APAB meetings. Thank you.
Regarding attendance and voting, and pardon me if I don't know the applicable parts of the bylaws that would address this, but regarding the option for electronic voting or voting without being present, there are many times that on the particular date of the APAB, physical presence is not possible, but attending electronically would absolutely be something for me or my alternate to do. Things like getting the agenda in advance, getting resolutions in advance, knowing what is going to be voted, perhaps could change the priority of attendance. And I think that having a valid quorum based upon the true number of MPUs is important. Whether MPUs are choosing to participate or not, separate issue, but just wanted to question on the option for electronic voting to get quorums up without changing the minimum.
Those were options that were discussed, but there was never an exact direction. We had a lot of questions and answers that basically did not allow me to present that in the bylaws. So we went with the simplest way to try to get the business done of APAB. We have had, I'd say, 4 times this year at least, no quorum, meaning no business. The people that did come were penalized. And again, the average number is 11, and that's why that's the magic number.
Thank you, Mr. Toomer. The prior suggestion, how would that account for nominations from the floor? I could see previously the write-ins, but how would that, the prior suggestion, based on the speaker just before me, if it went to electronic voting, how would it accommodate? Would it rewrite the bylaws in terms of?
I think anything regarding how we would do electronics would follow once we determined that we were able to do it electronically, and the bylaws would allow it. So,
but it would negate the ability to nominate.
But that's not what's in question now. I would like to take that up
I got you.
At a later time.
From a process perspective, it's important to keep in mind that we cannot amend the bylaws differently from what has been printed and distributed at this meeting. So, I mean, there's really not a lot of point in saying, I think we ought to do something different, because we can't do anything other than this change or no change.
Really? Isn't this
at this meeting?
Isn't this a review of the draft?
It is what is going before
If you're saying we shouldn't do what's before us because you think there's something better, that's fine, but we can't do something different at this meeting. We can do nothing, or we can do 11. And the reason for that is because you have to print and distribute the proposed amendment prior to the meeting. And so if I say, I think we need to do whatever I think we need to do here and now, that couldn't be done until next month.
Not having read the bylaws, currently you can't amend from the floor. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. It says, I'll quote, provided that the amendment has been submitted in writing at the previous regular meeting, and provided that notice of the intent to consider said amendments has been included in the notice of the meeting mailed to each member as provided for herein above.
That's under the current bylaws?
That is, yes, that is a requirement of the bylaws.
Okay. One last comment, Mr. Hunter. Did you want to make a final comment?
Sorry, just the last one. And these were handed out. I wasn't here last month. But these were handed out last month.
No.
If not, then we're actually in violation of what you just said.
I believe. Let me see here. I believe that they were submitted last month.
If they were not before this body last month to look at, then all these votes are invalid.
You make a fine point. Eric, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, I will. Basically, we discussed these at last meeting and did not hand them out. And the purpose of that was to bring them forward so that we could have a vote by next month.
Can you read that again, what you just read, what you just said?
Sure. And it says, provided that the amendment has been submitted in writing at the previous meeting, and provided that notice of the intent to consider said amendment has been included in the notice of the meeting mailed to each member as provided for here and above.
I view that as a checkbox, and we did not check our boxes.
Yeah, I believe I did get emailed a notice. Did I not, of this meeting?
No. When we provided in writing the amendments.
Oh.
The drafts, we were not.
Oh, okay, and again, I'm asking the question because I can't access the internet from here because they turned off the public Wi-Fi.
We did not.
We did not get emailed this notice?
We did not. I failed to send that to Debbie to distribute, and we're basically here now presenting it for next month. And the votes are not going to be actual votes in terms of pass or fail. That will be done next month.
Okay, we will record these votes as being a straw vote for agreement.
Okay, so we're not, in fact, amending the bylaws.
Thank you, Jim, for pointing that out. I do want to do a quick straw vote on the number 11 to see if we're going to have any chance of support for next month. Does that make sense? And if we need to change, we've gotten some really good comments about making the change of that number or keeping it the same. So very quickly, all those in favor of changing the number to 11, please raise your hand. I think 9 or 10? 10. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. I count 3, 4. Steve just raised his hand late. And abstentions. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to end the bylaw discussion.
Madam Chair, one last thing. Since we are presenting it to the body, would you consider, based on what we just saw here, being able to amend from the floor?
The bylaws do not allow that change currently.
You would have to first propose in writing an amendment to the bylaws that would permit the bylaws to be amended from the floor, and then it would be possible to amend them from the floor.
All that seems so encumbering. Just seems like.
But that's what the bylaws are. So
well,
no, it is what it is.
The bylaws.
You can't just toss the bylaws.
Well, no, it's not. The bylaws are designed to answer the issues that crop up within the forum on any number of procedure, policy. So I just find it very encumbering that you can't, from the floor, make an amendment and have the body vote on it. It's either a yay or nay from the floor.
If I will, or if I may, what we're doing is we are actually presenting this for the actual vote. So it is not going to be changed, because then we would have to go another 30-day cycle. And then it would have to be the same thing again and again and again. But as I stated, that during the executive meeting, we discuss the changes, and I'm open to putting anything in that the executive board wants to go forward with. We have had probably as many discussions on possibilities, from email vote, from mailing votes, to everything else, and we're running out of time. So
we are running out of time, and I need to give a president's report, because there's some, in the interest of transparency, there's things I need to share. If you want to make a bylaw change, send us an email. Just send us an apabatlanta@gmail.com. Yeah, I get that. Okay. I need to make a president's report. This would be under committee reports. The executive committee met on September 8th to discuss today's agenda items. Copies of the discussion items are on the front table. There should be plenty of copies there for your information. Some things you need to know. Melissa Moore, who has been our recording secretary, had to resign that position because of job commitments. Melissa's taken on responsibility for organizing APAB files online and building templates for minutes. She says that she'll help with the transition to a new secretary, so if anyone's interested in taking on this role through the end of the year and then continuing on to next year, please let me know. I acted as secretary today. I've been taking notes during the presentations, but it would be really cool if we could find someone that would take on that job. And she's made it so much simpler to do, so it's not as daunting as in previous years. Second, we need to appoint a committee to plan this year's Neighborhood Matters Awards. Traditionally, those are in December. What we'd like to do is kind of elevate that awards ceremony. Last year we did it here, then we moved to the council chambers. It was kind of awkward because we kind of had to wait for the luncheon to be ready. So we want to take this up a level. We want to elevate it. So if you're interested in taking on that project, please let me know or Ann Phillips know. She's been kind of spearheading some of the communications for doing that. If we don't get a volunteer, we're going to go out looking for folks. Third, we need to appoint a nominations committee. So if you're interested in participating in that, and now that you understand some of the requirements and restrictions around nominating committee members from our previous discussion, please let me know regarding that. If not, I'm going to tap last year's nominating committee. There are 3 openings on the Beltline TADAC and on the LRB. Descriptions are on today's agendas. Please share this with your NPUs. We'd like to get those appointments in place next month so that they can go to City Council. For Beltline TADAC, because we've had so many openings, I've been appointing them as people have expressed interest and have demonstrated their participation in their MPUs. For the License Review Board, I read the legislation, and apparently I can be a member of the LRB, or I could designate someone. So please let me know of your interest and get those bios and resumes to me. Then finally, the Executive Committee sent a fairly lengthy letter to CCI regarding the NPU initiative, asking for understanding of a number of questions that we've received from NPUs over the course of their project. They returned a very lengthy response to us that's taken some time to kind of sift through those response. We had a short conference call yesterday. There are no notes yet on that. It took place late, to discuss a meeting with CCI after today's meeting to discuss how APAB can work together going forward. To that end, I'm appointing a new ad hoc committee to be our interface, to be led by Richard Rao from NPUB. He will be the point person. Working with him will be Terry Ross, Eric Toomer, Eunice Glover, and Amy Stout. If you're wondering why those individuals, it's because we're looking for representatives from across the entire city. So we want to make sure we have a diversity of opinion. If you have any concerns about the MPU project, in the initiative, please work with Richard and the others on the committee so that we can kind of funnel things through them as a group. Upcoming events, we're moving the executive committee. Richard has worked with DePalma's, and we've had some great meetings there. We're now going to try a new location. The attempt is to move those meetings around the city. It's at the Wild Heaven Beer West End Brewery, and the next APAB meeting is October 19th with a housing forum to follow that meeting. I have overextended the time. Y'all have been extremely patient. Is there anything else? Well, we're actually out of time. So is there a motion to adjourn?
We can.
So moved. Great. Thank you. Okay. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Yeah, we can get you another agenda. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion. Okay. Great. Leah's got some things to share, so if you've got just a couple more minutes.
Thank you all for your patience and good afternoon. I didn't mind reporting after adjournment, so if you all want to head on out, I'm fine with that. My feelings won't be hurt one bit. Just wanted to report out on some